everyone. This is the peaceful revolutionary Sylvain Rochon. I'm coming to you today with I think is still a hot topic, something that's still discussed a lot because it is quite topical, it's persistent, it's ongoing, and we're talking about climate change. And there's a lot of information, a lot of different opinions about it, and I figured as a scientist and a revolutionary, of course, I'd shed a little bit of light on it. And unfortunately, I don't want to get your hopes up. I have no absolute solutions for you. I'm just going to present some facts like I usually do, and you can make your own mind about what's real and what's not. Because unfortunately, I don't have any insider information about what's really going on and a lot of the data, and I'll explain why. So you guys can do more research and figure things out. It is an extremely complex problem, and in part that's why there's a lot of I think there's a lot of corruption around it. There's money involved in it, of course, because any complex systems that worry people. There are some companies and some governments and some entities that will seek to profit from the situation because people can't really get to the truth. There's a way to hide things and to kind of just edge some money off of the problem and the situation. And I'll get into that in a minute. Now, first, what I wanted to do is I wanted to set down some facts, at least some graphs and some different things like that. And I did provide a number of links down below that show some graphs. And what I decided to do, since there's so many sources of information, I decided to get all the information from NASA. And I'm not saying NASA is uncorruptible. Actually, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying this is a single source of information, so we have a coherent view of what they are saying, what's happening, at least as far as data is concerned. And you'll understand in 30 seconds. That's a good method in this case, because what seems to be the problem and the argument is, as illustrated in the ClimateGate emails. These are emails that were stolen, hacked from university professors' computers, and it seems to indicate that people are arguing about the data, and the issue seems to be more about falsification or exaggeration or manipulation of climate data. And institutions like NASA base their graphs on data that are collected by professors, climatologists, and geologists, and environmentalists. And so if the data is incorrect or manipulated in some way, NASA and the other organizations, whoever it is, they're going to pick the set that they like and they're going to display it, or they don't have access to any extra information or data that would contradict it. Because NASA, for example, does not measure temperatures in the same way as a scientist does. They do have access to satellites and things like that. They can do certain things. They can measure, for example, infrared radiations and things like that themselves. But a lot of the information they get for a lot of these studies actually comes from the universities. So if the profs themselves, because of money, pressure, whatever it is, they falsify their data, or they flip it a little bit, that's what you get at NASA, and it's not the fault of NASA. You get my point. So anyhow, this is what it looks like as far as from NASA's information perspective. Now here's the core of it all. We have the carbon dioxide emissions since like way back when, and you can see the graph here that carbon emissions have been fluctuating over X amount of time, and this typically is this graph is the information for this graph is taken from collecting samples of ice in ice flows, for example, and the deeper you go, apparently the older it is, and then you check the CO2 levels, and you get a certain graph over time, and you see there seems to be a natural cycle of CO2, right, over X amount of years. And in the last 50, 60, 70 years, you can see that like we had a natural, possibly a natural spike, and then it went way higher, and that's what the more current modern measurements of CO2 are taken. So from this data, we can see that obviously there is a much higher than normal CO2 level in the atmosphere. Okay, that's one set of data. Now, this fluctuation up and down over time, like way before humans were industrialized, of course, this is mostly due to nature. Like there's a natural cycle of CO2, O2, as well as the planet's heating and cooling, and emissions from volcanoes and earthquakes and kind of natural emissions like that. So there's like a natural cycle in everything. So it goes up and down like this, no problem. That's basically just nature's cycling through its natural means, and I'll get back to that in a minute as well. So that's okay. Now, the effect of CO2 in the atmosphere, it's been explained. I know most of you probably have seen it. It has two effects, I guess, two major effects that are interesting to the whole ideology. First effect is that it's a negative one, I'd call it. It, in fact, keeps the infrared inside the atmosphere. Like essentially, CO2 tends to bounce back or absorb long wavelengths of light. So infrared is some of it, which means the heat is kind of captured, which a long time ago we called the greenhouse effect. So even though plants and the planet is kind of rumbling, and the animals are emitting, like through farting, literally, CO2, and a lot of it, because there's a huge amounts of animals on the planet, including ourselves. That's the main actually contributor to CO2, by the way. Industrialization has added a whole lot more to the mix. So indeed, because there's more CO2, in parallel, there has to be an increase in heat. And a natural increase in heat because of the added CO2 in the atmosphere. That just makes scientific sense. Now, there's a good aspects of the additional CO2 in the atmosphere, which is not really discussed, interestingly. Because, of course, there's a lot of money in climate change discussions and companies trying to counter it and selling products. That's where there's a lot of money. So the benefits of the CO2 in the atmosphere is not really discussed, but there is a benefit to the CO2, and a very strong benefit. NASA also talks about this, which is why I tend to, go with their data. Even the data could be, wrong in many respects. They seem to be presenting both sides of the coin, so that's good. Essentially, the benefit of CO2 is that it's greening the planet. There's an actual uptake over the last number of years of green. Like we are chopping down the forests, as you know. That's our damn fault, especially in Central America and Central Africa. People are just like making more farmland because they want to eat, and there's the whole issue, and including industrialists cutting down trees and destroying ecosystems. That's terrible. So they are degreening in their respect the planet by chopping down things. But what's really interesting, and you have the link below as well, there's also a greening of the planet, especially in the northern and southern parts of the planet where there's not a lot of population. It's getting greener. Why? Because plants love CO2. They grow, and their growth increases with the concentration of CO2. And what's also interesting, and this is the balance part, and I couldn't find any information on this because maybe there's not a lot of research on this. Again, possibly because greening of the planet does not equate money. If you green up the planet, it's going to cool it off. you can see that there's the site about the temperature change. If you look at the temperature change data on the website from NASA, which I have down below, you can see temperature over time and temperature delta, like difference over time over X number of years, and you can see that temperature does increase. As far as a variation, pretty much alongside the graph of the CO2 increase, additional increase. Because of course, with the CO2 going like this, like a wave, like a sine function over a number of time, you'd expect temperature also to do that, and it does to a certain degree. You can see it a little bit in the graph. You see temperatures going up and down, and then starting in the 1960s or so, it starts kind of going up a lot more, and recently a lot higher in the last 20, 25 years. The point is, I mean, if you look at the areas on the map, the areas that have high forests seem to be cooler. They keep their temperature a lot more, and that's the effect of plant life. The more plant life there is, the more tempered the temperature is. Not necessarily because they absorb the CO2. It is a factor, but also because it retains water a lot more when you have plant life, and water has a way to be a really good damper on temperature. It kind of keeps temperature stable and keeps things cool naturally, just the molecule of water. So green stuff, plants, tends to mitigate temperature changes like this. Now, so that's a good part of the CO2. However, and the article does say this, the article from NASA about the CO2 is this is just temporary. Of course, it's going to keep, plants are going to keep growing, but there's just so much CO2 plants can take. So if we keep ejecting CO2 into the atmosphere, it's going to, plants will keep, eating the CO2 in some respect, but it has a limited effect, and it's kind of, this effect does not linearly translate to higher growth. For example, if you double the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, it won't double the growth of plants. It's not linear. There's limited returns on the increases of CO2. So we do want to continue reducing pollution to our planet and reducing CO2 emissions, just because it kind of hurts the natural balance of the planet in general. So we want to do that now. And we should, because like if you have any sense at all, disrupting the natural balance of the place you live in is no bueno. It's not good. It's a little bit like, if you're the only smoker in your house. I'm using that as an example. Sorry, smokers. But everybody knows this, so I'm going to use it. If you're the only smoker in the house, when you're polluting the house, right, and you're polluting the place you're living in, and you're polluting everybody else as well because you're the one creating the pollution. So the best solution is for you to stop smoking, and then you can essentially clean the house up, and everybody can have a nice environment. So it's kind of idiotic to smoke inside of your own house, and a lot of smokers actually, and I know many, they refuse to smoke in their own house because they understand this. They smoke outside, they're polluting the bigger house, but I mean their own little smoke doesn't affect the earth as much as their home. So they're being sensible to their own health and to a degree, and to other people's health by doing that. So we should be doing that for the planet, right? Let's stop shitting. Well, let's continue shitting, but let's stop polluting the planet. We know we're doing it, so let's keep going in that direction. That's just logical. Let's get on the planet's team. So, let's sync up with the planet's natural cycles so that it can keep supporting us naturally and nicely, and we don't suffer as many backlash effects from global warming or climate change, as they call it. And it's a little bit ridiculous because, I mean, I have to put in a parenthesis here. The whole concept of climate change is kind of stupid to me. They should call it what it is, pollution. That's really the problem. It's about polluting the planet And yes, there is global warming, but a lot of the global warming, if you do a bunch of research, there's a lot of the global warming is actually because the sun's getting warmer, because of the natural peaking of the planet's CO2 levels, the natural CO2 levels. If you look at the charts, you see we're right in that top where it's supposed to be according to the timeline. The natural, we're inside that peak of the natural cycle. A lot of it is due to that, and like the main issue is, I'm going to get back to it, is that there's a lot of money into it, and so people use these terms to scare people into spending money or encouraging their governments or companies to spend money in more money than they should to actually deal with certain issues that are kind of faked into it or manipulated. So yes, let's spend money to depollute, and actually that's a bad thing. Usually companies hate it. To put scrubbers, and they have to spend more money to actually clean up what they would be just easily ejected into the atmosphere. So we should continue doing that. We should continue spending money, and we should continue doing research and have like companies actually bring solutions to help that. That's the good part. But there's all sorts of research and science that essentially is not good. And one of the points, and I have the link down there too, is like there's an email from Hal Lewis, who is from the University of California. That was in 2010, I believe. Yeah. And he's he's one of the professor emeritus of physics at the University of California. He was like on the board, one of the top guys at American Physical Society, which is one of the top societies for scientists in the States. And he wrote a letter like resigning essentially in this at this link. And just being sick about the corruption among the scientists essentially being paid directly or indirectly through doing research on climate change topics that are manipulative, irrelevant, that are not totally scientific. And he's describing that as it's been corrupted, that science is not pure anymore. It's being driven by the economical machine. So again, this points to data being injected in the data stream that are picked up by organizations to show different things, and that are manipulated, false, or added or there's insinuations that of all sorts. This comes from the scientists, people that we think are, typically very objective and don't really suffer from the complex of the economical complex, at least from the perspective of most people. So that really tells something. So we can't really trust a lot of the data. However, one thing that came out of my research, and it's there's another link I put down about that talks about the ClimateGate emails, for example, and you can read that through. And as a scientist, I can really totally get into this. A lot of the ClimateGate stuff also has been hyped because people are upset and they want a scapegoat, for example. But if you look at the discussions, the email discussions themselves between scientists, for the most part, they seem very natural. Scientists have the hard job of interpreting data, and that's where it becomes nebulous and a little bit gray. If a scientist is corrupted by money or financed in a way where he's being directed to have a certain opinion, obviously the data he's going to look is going to be analyzed a certain way, and he's going to come to certain conclusions that are in line with his employer or funder. And that's the driver of money. There's always pure research is always funded by organizations that have a certain agenda of some sort, whether it's pure research, which is typically like universities, like themselves. For the most part, they just want to publish good papers that are going to be popular or advanced science, like more on the pure kind of science. But there's a lot of research that are funded, including university research, that are outside funded by companies that have more financial agendas. They want to sell stuff or services. So it's directed In those cases, those scientists are kind of told or angled to, okay, well, the idea here, we want to show this result. So when they analyze the data, they'll omit some data that they shouldn't, and they'll accept data that they shouldn't, and it's going to paint a different picture. It's not as clear as just like a few data points and here's the curve. There's a lot of data, especially when you talk about climate. There's a lot of data out there that has to be analyzed and accumulated, and it's part of the scientist's job to eliminate some and keep some according to some rules of mathematics. Usually, there's some uncertainty and some errors basically in data, and there's some points that have to be eliminated as part of the process of analysis. Long story short, we have to be skeptical about every chart we're seeing, and we shouldn't be too panicky about some of the results. Some people kind of declaring certain things, especially if it's governments or big companies. Like, here's a big problem. Okay, let's go to the source of the problem. The source of the problem is indeed us polluting. So all we should be focusing on, really, to avoid the whole discussion of who's corrupt and who's done it, is just, okay, let's focus on getting us on track with the planet. That's it. The planet's going to have its own cycle. It's going to keep living whether we live or die as humans. Always remember that. There's no danger to the planet. The planet's fine. It's going to keep being fine. When we die, if we destroy ourselves because of too high temperatures, water, naturally we're going to stop. The industry is going to stop, and naturally the planet's going to go back to its natural state, natural cycles. It's going to move on. The problem is that we're going to die and probably bring along with us a lot of plants and animals if we keep going this way. So all we need to focus on is like, hey, let's stop polluting. Let's do a better recycling. Let's get into that game, and let's focus exclusively on that and ignore all the jibber jabber of climate change and all these complex. These are all, this is all just talk. And this is all driven by money. There's funds, either from research or from companies or from governments. Somebody's trying to profit from all this big hoopla. The media is trying to profit from all the hoopla. They want to sell eyeballs. They want to sell papers. They want to sell, media. You don't need all that stuff. All you need to focus on is like, okay, let's make sure what we take from the environment, we give back an equal amount or more. The planet's going to take care of itself, guys. Don't worry about it. Let's make sure we take care of ourselves. How is that translated in practicum? In practicum, when you buy, you have the power. You're the ones at with the big end of the stick. We always have the big end of the sticks as individuals. When you buy something, check and make sure that the whole process of manufacturing said thing is the least polluting as possible, and drive your buying patterns according to that. Now, what I mean by this is that sometimes certain things are very green, or they seem very green. I'm going to research this at the same time. Get a website for you, another website for you. I'm gonna post it down about the global pollution index. I'm gonna determine this for you. This is essentially the global pollution index is a number that determines the whole path of pollution, of producing something. Because what is included in a product is not only how it's made by the component. That can be like, you can have something, I don't know, that's made out of wood. Okay. Just an example, maybe a piece of furniture made out of natural wood. I mean, the item itself can be very green. Like if you cut wood using an axe and you fashion by hand a piece of furniture, I mean, you're pretty green. I mean, you're not producing a lot of pollution. You're very, very nil pollution. However, if this piece of furniture was made in Indonesia and it's shipped here, there's a certain amount of gas, emissions, and all sorts of stuff that was produced from transporting the piece of furniture over here. And also, like, what about the lacquers and things that are on top of that? In Indonesia, they don't have the same regulations as here. Maybe it's a highly polluting substance that is very, very costly, environmentally wise, to produce, and then you use that lacquer on this natural piece of wood because the guy just buys it and just lacquers, even though he's in his home making piece of furniture. So that also has an impact. So the global pollution index is an idea. It's not out. It's an idea to allow the consumer to drive environmental friendly purchasing habits, and that drives the money into making not furnitures, but products and services that are as green as possible and as balanced to the planet as possible. Because we are the ones buying, we're the ones that finance all this corruption, this funding, and this industrialization, all the money that's into this bogus climate change things. So a global pollution is something that would allow us to see what everything is. There's some initiatives that are doing that are trying to do some really great things. Like there's the Good Guide people, for example. I'm posting the link below. They are, it's mainly in the States, but you can look at products as far as, how, in a similar way, like how exactly environmentally friendly is this product, from sourcing of raw materials, transportation to manufacturing of it. And if we all pay attention to these things in our purchasing habits, we drive the whole economy and even the corrupting aspects of it. Because if there's the mass population doesn't buy into highly polluted or highly polluting products and services, there's going to be a lot more money into resolving the problem, instead of trying to tell us some bullshit and to sell us on that and the media and all this stuff. It's trillions of dollars annually that are associated with the climate change fiasco. And the bottom line is really, really simple. So we're blinded by all these details, all this panic. But all we need to focus on is our own buying habits and make sure that we're smart and we're in line with the planet. That's it. Okay. So hopefully the resources I'm providing you down below in the description are helpful to guide you. Do your own research. Like I pulled my information from NASA. There's a whole bunch of other organizations that probably are showing other pieces. Well, I know they are showing data in a different way. Look into that. It's good information to be aware of cycles and what's really going on as far as information, even though we can't trust information as much as we'd like to. But just do focus on what you can do for yourselves and for the environment. That's really it. So it's all in our hands. As usual, peaceful revolutionaries, we have the power in our hands. And spread the word to other people. Like people are not savvy about these things because it's complex. Let the people know. Look, just focus on this. Just focus on your own thing in your own house, and do the best you can. Everything else is kind of domino effect its way into that same pattern if a sufficient number of people does it. Just a little bit like being happy is a solution to world peace. As an individual, and I spoke about this in another video, the solution to world peace is really individuals making sure there's the happiest as possible. And there's a whole reasoning behind it, which I won't go into here, obviously. But, there's a domino effect, there's a chain effect, and there's a simple solution that we each can adhere to our own way without having to wait for organizations and people that really can be helpful. It's too complex. Just focus on yourself, do what you need to do, share the word, and things will happen. Have a nice day, revolutionaries. We'll see you again next time. Ciao.